Section 6. Information not available at the time of the Warren Commission investigation. A. Sylvia Tirado, née Duran. 1. House Select Committee on Assassinations, June 6, 1978. Interview of Sylvia Tirado. Ms. Tirado, Sylvia divorced Horatio Duran in 1968, was never questioned by American officials in 1963. Thus, the committee established contact with the Mexican government and requested that the Mexican government make Sylvia Tirado available for an interview. The Mexican government complied on June 6, 1978. Ms. Tirado told the House Select Committee on Assassinations the following. Lee Harvey Oswald visited the Cuban consulate 3 times on September 27, 1963, not twice as the Warren Commission previously reported. Oswald first visited the Cuban consulate at approximately 11 a.m., requesting an in-transit visa to Cuba with Russia as the final destination. He showed her some documents, then left to obtain photographs needed for his application. Oswald returned at approximately 1 p.m. with 4 photographs. Ms. Tirado typed the application in duplicate, stapled a picture on top of each, and had Oswald sign each in her presence. As identification, Oswald showed her documents he had brought, his Russian labor card, marriage certificate with the name of his Russian wife, his American Communist Party membership card, and his Fair Play for Cuba membership card. Ms. Tirado found Lee Harvey Oswald's behavior suspicious because normally a communist traveled only with his passport, as belonging to the Communist Party was illegal in Mexico in 1963. There was a procedure whereby the American Communist Party would arrange visa matters for their members with the Cuban Communist Party. The American would then come to Mexico, visit the Cuban consulate, and receive his visa immediately. When Tirado asked Oswald why he did not have the American Communist Party arrange his trip to Cuba, he stated that he had not had the time. After explaining to Oswald that he had to acquire a Russian visa before he could receive a Cuban visa, Tirado jotted her name and business phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to Oswald, who then left to get his Russian visa. Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., which was after normal working hours, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The guard called Tirado, stating that someone who did not speak Spanish was at the gate inquiring about a visa. As routine procedure, she asked the guard to escort the individual to her office. Oswald told her that he had acquired a Russian visa. Since he did not produce it when asked, she called the Russian consulate. The consul told Duran that Oswald had been to the consulate requesting a visa and had been told that the reply would take approximately 4 months. When she relayed the message to Oswald, he got very excited, insisting that as a person who had been in jail because of the Cuban Revolution, he should receive a visa. Oswald stated that he could not wait that long because his Mexican visa expired in 3 days. At this time, Ms. Tirado informed Consul Eusebio Azcue of the situation. Azcue had been in his private office, which he shared with his upcoming replacement, Alfredo Mirabal. Azcue politely explained the requisites for an in-transit visa to Oswald. When he noticed that Oswald was a stubborn man, he told Oswald that he was obviously not a friend of the Cuban Revolution because he would otherwise understand that Cuba had to be extremely careful with the people it allowed in the country. Azcue and Oswald yelled at each other. Then Azcue went to the door, opened it, and asked Oswald to leave. Oswald did not revisit or telephone the consulate. Ms. Tirado described Lee Harvey Oswald as approximately 5 feet 6, with sparse blonde hair, weighing about 125 pounds. 2. CIA information not available at the time of the Warren Commission investigation. A. Leering 3 allegation. In 1967, a report that Sylvia Duran had had intimate relations with Lee Harvey Oswald came to the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station. The source, Leering 3, stated that he had recently received a call from Sylvia Duran. A telephone tap on Leering 3's telephone confirmed that Sylvia Duran had called Leering. Leering 3 reported that he had visited Sylvia to renew acquaintances. During the visit, Duran told Leering 3 that she had met Lee Harvey Oswald at the Cuban consulate when he applied for a visa and had dated him on several occasions. Duran admitted that she had had intimate relations with Oswald, but insisted that she had no idea of his plans. In addition, Duran told Leering 3 that when the news of the assassination became public knowledge, the Mexican government arrested her and, during the interrogation, beat her until she admitted that she had had an affair with Lee Harvey Oswald. Roten counseled Leering 3 against any further contact with Duran because the Cubans or the Mexican police might become suspicious of him. There is no indication in Roten's report as to why contact with Sylvia would make the Cubans suspicious. The CIA Mexico City station reported this information to headquarters. First, that Sylvia Duran had sexual intercourse with Lee Harvey Oswald on several occasions when the latter was in Mexico is probably new, but adds little to the Oswald case. Second, the Mexican police did not report the extent of the Duran-Oswald relationship to this station. In the chronology of the Mexico City investigation of Oswald, Raymond Roca notes, "Why didn't Mexico police give us all info?" This was not the first report of such a relationship between Oswald and Duran. Elena Garro had reported the same information to Charles Thomas in 1965. That the Mexican government did not disclose all the information in its possession to American authorities raises one of three possibilities. 1. The Mexican government did not want to disclose that one of its citizens had had intimate relations with the assassin of John Kennedy, or 2. Sylvia Duran was a Mexican penetration agent in the Cuban consulate, and the Mexican government was protecting its informant by minimizing her relationship with Oswald, or 3. They forgot, i.e., a pure and simple mistake. B. The possibility that Sylvia Duran was an agent for either American, Mexican, or Cuban intelligence. Since the publication of the Warren Commission report in September 1964, critics have written about the possibility that Sylvia Duran was an intelligence agent for either the Americans, Mexicans, or Cubans. 1. Was Sylvia Duran an agent, asset, or source for Mexican or American intelligence? In an effort to resolve this question, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reviewed the United States Investigative Agency's files on Sylvia Duran. The committee found no evidence in this file review that Sylvia Duran was either an American or Mexican intelligence agent. In addition, the committee has interviewed most of the Mexico City station employees about the possibility. Only David Phillips, chief of covert action and the Cuban section in the Mexico City station in 1963, a position which made him very knowledgeable, considered that Duran was possibly an agent or source. Mr. Phillips stated that, at one time, the agency pitched almost everyone at the Cuban embassy. Mr. Phillips stated that he had first heard Duran's name from the telephone intercept transcripts. But Mr. Phillips asserted that the CIA had no interest in Miss Duran because she wasn't friendly with anyone. Mr. Phillips had previously mentioned the CIA Mexico City station's interest in recruiting a former Cuban ambassador to Mexico named Lechuga. Mr. Phillips was shown a memorandum written by W. David Slauson of the Warren Commission staff regarding a trip to Mexico by Warren Commission staff members, which said, quote, Mr. Scott's, chief of the CIA station in Mexico City, narrative disclosed that the CIA's action immediately after the assassination consisted basically of alerting all its confidential sources of information throughout Mexico to immediately channel all information into their headquarters, and of compiling as complete dossiers as possible on Oswald and everyone else throughout Mexico who at that time the CIA knew had had some contact with Oswald. This meant especially Sylvia Duran, who, because she had previously been having an affair with Lechuga, the former Cuban ambassador to Mexico, and presently the Cuban representative at the United Nations, had previously been of substantial interest to the CIA. End quote. Mr. Phillips was surprised by this and stated that no one let me in on this operation. But Mr. Phillips added that he doubted that Duran would have been pitched because the station could not identify any of her weaknesses. The committee staff members then told Mr. Phillips about the reporting on file concerning Miss Duran from one of the station's penetration agents, redacted, at the Cuban embassy. At one point, redacted had reported to his case officer that all that would have to be done to recruit Miss Duran was to get a blonde, blue-eyed American in bed with her. With this, Mr. Phillips said that it did indeed sound as if the station had targeted Miss Duran for recruitment, that the station's interest had been substantial, and that the weaknesses and means had been identified. Mr. Phillips pointed out, however, that because Duran had been targeted did not necessarily mean that she had been pitched. In addition, he stated that he had never heard that Duran had been pitched. Mr. Phillips did state that he would expect that Miss Duran's file at the CIA would be very thick because of all the telephone intercepts that concerned her and the substantial interest that the station had in her. He stated that much of the material in her file should predate the assassination. Mr. Phillips stated that he would be very surprised if Miss Duran's 201 file was small and contained only a few pre-assassination documents. This is, in fact, the case of the Headquarters 201 file. This committee has asked the CIA to make Miss Duran's Mexican P personality file available for review. The CIA informed the committee that there was no P file available on Miss Duran. Footnote: the HSCA requested of the CIA on August 20th, 1978, an explanation of why there was no P file on Sylvia Duran, Luisa Calderon Carralero, Teresa Proenza, Eusebio Azcu Lopez, Guillermo Oresta, Ruiz Perez, Gilberto Policarpo Lopez, Juan Manuel Calvillo Alonso, and June Viola Cobb Sharp. The agency responded the following on September 11, 1978. Station index cards show the following information, re 201 numbers and P numbers. 1. Sylvia Duran. No info, re P number. 2. Luisa Calderon Carralero. P8292, destroyed. 3. Teresa Proenza. No info, re P number. 4. Eusebio Azcu Lopez. P6613, destroyed. 5. Guillermo Orestes Ruiz Perez. No info, re P number. 6. No index card on Gilberto Policarpo Lopez. There is an index card on one Gilberto Policarpo Lopez which does not list any 201 or P number. 7. Juan Manuel Calvillo Alonso. No info, re P number. 8. June Viola Cobb Sharp. P7381, destroyed. End footnote. Another CIA employee, redacted, who worked on an Oswald task force in late September or early October of 1975, dealing with Freedom of Information Act lawsuits brought against the agency concerning the files on Lee Harvey Oswald, stated that he believed that Miss Duran may have been a source of information for either the CIA or the Mexicans. Mr. Redacted could not recall why he specifically had this recollection, but thought that it was due to something he had seen in Oswald's file. He said that it may have been the agency's attempts to protect Miss Duran after the assassination and the heavy cable traffic that those attempts generated that led him to his inference that she was a source of information for either the agency or the Mexicans. Despite Leering 3's case officers asking Leering 3 not to recontact Miss Duran, Mr. Phillips's statements and Redacted's hazy recollections, the committee cannot definitely resolve whether Sylvia Duran was a Mexican or American intelligence agent or source. 2. Was Sylvia Duran a Cuban intelligence agent? In an effort to resolve this question, the HSCA reviewed the United States Investigative Agency's files on Sylvia Duran. The committee found no evidence in the files that would indicate that Miss Duran was associated with Cuban intelligence. In addition, the HSCA interviewed most of the Mexico City station employees about the possibility that Duran worked for Cuban intelligence. Only Barney Hidalgo, a CIA officer who traveled to Mexico City in 1963, considered the possibility to be likely. Mr. Hidalgo, professing not to remember all the details, stated that he thought that Duran was a Cuban intelligence agent. Hidalgo said, quote, "At the time when this contact told me of Sylvia Duran, I tied the two together. Yes, sir. I don't know how at that time it was obvious to me as an intelligence agent that there was some connection there, but it was of no interest whatsoever to me. I do remember that when I next saw this contact of mine, I mentioned the fact to him and let him proceed to do whatever he wanted to." End quote. Mr. Hidalgo further stated that he never resolved the issue. With no corroborating evidence for Mr. Hidalgo's memory, the committee must conclude that Sylvia Duran was probably never employed by Cuban intelligence. B. The Cubans. 1. Eusebio Azcu Lopez. When Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly visited the Cuban consulate, Eusebio Azcu Lopez, a Cuban citizen, was the Cuban consul. Because he had diplomatic immunity, the Cuban government had never been asked to make him available for questioning. Footnote: the U.S. relations with Cuba in 1963-1964 were not very good. See U.S.-Cuban Relations section. Also, Azcu traveled from Mexico to Cuba on November 18, 1963. End footnote. The committee, in an effort to investigate Oswald's contact with representatives of the Cuban government, asked the Cuban government to make Eusebio Azcu available for committee and staff interviews. The Cuban government complied with the committee's request on April 1, 1978. During that interview, Mr. Azcu alleged that the man Jack Ruby shot in the Dallas police station was not the same individual who had visited the Cuban consulate in 1963. In addition, Mr. Azcu stated that Alfredo Mirabal, who in September 1963 had recently arrived from Cuba to assume the consul's duties, had also been present during Oswald's visit. During a second trip to Cuba, the committee interviewed Alfredo Mirabal. Subsequent to this second trip to Havana, the committee asked the Cuban government to make Eusebio Azcu and Alfredo Mirabal available for the public hearings on September 18, 1978. The Cuban government complied with the committee's request. Eusebio Azcu Lopez told the House Select Committee on Assassinations at a public hearing on September 18, 1978, the following: "An individual who gave the name Lee Harvey Oswald visited the Cuban consulate on 3 occasions in late September and early October 1963. The individual first visited the Cuban consulate during working hours, requesting an in-transit visa to Cuba with Russia as the final destination. The man showed the secretary, Sylvia Duran, some documents which he believed would be sufficient to obtain a visa. When the secretary would not grant him a visa, the man asked Azcu to see whether upon examination of the documents he could grant him a visa. Azcu answered negatively. The individual then left to obtain photographs needed for his application. The man probably returned on September 27, 1963, with the photographs and completed the applications in Miss Duran's presence. As the amount of time required to process this document could have taken as long as 20 days, or the response could have been negative, Azcu told the man that he could grant him an in-transit visa to Cuba without consulting his government if he had a Russian visa. The individual then left to attempt to obtain his Russian visa. After the man left the Cuban consulate, Azcu received a telephone call from the Soviet consulate. The Soviet consul explained that the man's documents were legitimate, but the Soviet consulate could not issue a visa until it received authorization from Moscow. Emphasizing that the Cuban consulate never received visitors after working hours, Mr. Azcu opined that the individual probably returned to the consulate on September 28, 1963. When Azcu explained to Oswald that he could not grant him a visa, the man made statements directed against Cuba and called Cuba a bureaucracy. At that point, Azcu became upset and asked the individual to leave the consulate. Oswald did not revisit the consulate. Mr. Askew described the man who visited the consulate as follows: a white male, between 5'6" and 5'7", over 30 years of age, very thin, long face, with straight eyebrows and a cold look in his eyes. Askew alleged that he would never have identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the man who visited the Cuban consulate in 1963. 2. Alfredo Mirabal Diaz. Alfredo Mirabal Diaz told the House Select Committee on Assassinations at a public hearing on September 18, 1978, the following: Lee Harvey Oswald, seeking a visa, visited the Cuban consulate twice in September 1963. Since Mirabal could not speak English, though he was the new consul, ex-consul Askew handled the matter. On both occasions, there were such loud arguments between Oswald and Askew that Mirabal thought that the man's visit to the consulate was a case of provocation. Though Mirabal caught only glimpses of the man, he opined that the person whose picture appears on Lee Harvey Oswald's visa application was the same Lee Harvey Oswald who visited the consulate. Mirabal was about 4 meters away from Oswald each time he caught glimpses of him. Oswald was at the consulate between 15 and 20 minutes on each visit. C. Elena Garro de Paz. On October 5, 1964, 11 days after the publication of the Warren Commission report, Elena Garro de Paz's story alleging Lee Harvey Oswald's presence at a party in Mexico City attended by Cuban government personnel came to the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. 1. Elena's story as reported October 5, 1964. Elena Garro de Paz and Deborah Garro de Guerrero Galvan, first cousins of Horatio, Ruben, and Lydia Duran, were invited to a twist party at the home of Ruben Duran in the middle of the week in the fall of 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald was alleged to have been at this party in the company of 2 other beatnik-looking boys. The Americans remained together the entire evening and did not dance. When Elena tried to speak with the Americans, she was shifted to another room by one of her cousins. The memo does not state whether Elena had mentioned which cousin had not allowed her to speak to the Americans. One of Elena's cousins told her at the time that he or she did not know who the Americans were, except that Sylvia Duran, an employee of the Cuban embassy and the wife of Horatio Duran, had brought them to the party. The day after the party, Elena and Deba saw the 3 Americans on the Insurgentes, a main avenue in Mexico City. The Garros claimed that they had recognized Oswald's photograph when it was published after the assassination. Sylvia Duran's arrest underlined the Garros' certainty that the man had been Lee Harvey Oswald. The source of the memo was a witting Central Intelligence Agency asset known by the cryptonym Lie Cookie 1, whom the committee identified as June Cobb Sharp while reviewing the Lie Cookie file. According to Elena, Miss Cobb was sent to her house shortly after the assassination for a few days by a mutual friend, a Costa Rican writer named Eunice Odio. Miss Garro asserted that while at her house, Miss Cobb expressed interest in the Kennedy assassination. One night, Elena's sister Deba, who was visiting, got drunk and told the whole story. Claiming to be a CIA agent, Cobb suggested that Elena and Deba go to Texas to tell their story. Elena stated that when Cobb's suggestion was rejected, Cobb stated that she would arrange a meeting with the CIA station chief. The meeting did not occur because Miss Cobb was asked to leave the Garro house, evidently because she kicked Elena's cat. A notation on the memo says that Lie Cookie 1 never regained contact with Elena Garro de Paz. The Lie Cookie memo was not inserted in either the Elena Garro or Lee Harvey Oswald P. personality file, but in a local leftist and Cuban project file. The committee learned about the memo from WX7241, a chronological history of the Oswald case prepared by Raymond Roca for the CIA in 1967. The memo was found in December 1965 by Stanley Watson. A marginal notation on WX7241 says, "Why was this not sent to headquarters?" The committee has been able to determine that the memo was forwarded to headquarters shortly thereafter. 2. October 12, 1964. CIA memo for the record. On October 12, 1964, the CIA Mexico City Station's Chief of Covert Action, Jim Flannery, wrote a memo for the record reporting that Elena Garro de Paz had told her story to Eunice Odio. The committee has not been able to determine if Elena Garro told Miss Odio the story personally or if Miss Cobb related the story to Miss Odio, who relayed it to Tichborne. Footnote: Tichborne was redacted cryptonym. Redacted was a witting asset who wrote propaganda pieces for the CIA. After careful review of redacted CIA file, the HSCA has not been able to establish a link from redacted to either Miss Odio or Cobb. End footnote. The story is not as detailed as the October 5, 1964 version. There is no mention of Deba Garro Guerrero Galvan. The story, perhaps because it is third-hand, differs from the previous story in two areas. It states that the party was at the Cuban embassy, as opposed to Ruben Duran's, and that Elena talked to a Cuban embassy official instead of her cousins about the three Americans. Attached to the memo was a note from Flannery to the Chief of Station, Winston Scott, which read, "Do you want me to send the gist of this to headquarters?" Scott then noted that the memo should be filed. The file indications show that the memo went into the Oswald P file and the Elena Garro P file. 3. November 24, 1964, CIA Informant Report. On November 24, 1964, a Central Intelligence Agency agent reported information derived from an asset, Lycant-1. Footnote: While reviewing Lycant-1's file, the committee determined that the CIA asset's true name was Manuel Calvillo, who Elena claimed escorted her and her daughter to the Vermont Hotel for protection the day following JFK's assassination. End footnote. The agent asserted that June Cobb was an American communist who rented a room from Elena Garro. In addition, the informant claimed that Elena had also told her story to an American official at the embassy who claimed to represent the Warren Commission. The Chief of Station noted that he had asked Lycant-1 to pursue the story, but there is no indication that the Chief of Station followed through with the request. 4. November 24, 1964. Elena Garro meeting with Mexico City legal attaché officers. Elena and her daughter reported their story to the Mexico City legal attaché on November 24, 1964. The legal attaché in 1964 was Clark Anderson. They recounted the same story previously given to June Cobb Sharp in October 1964. Elena gave the date of the party as September 30th, October 1st, or October 2nd, 1963. The agent who wrote the report noted that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have been identical with the American allegedly observed by Mrs. Paz at the party if this party were held on the evening of October 1st or October 2nd, 1963. Footnote: FBI investigation of President Kennedy's assassination had established that Lee Harvey Oswald had departed Mexico City by bus at 8:30 a.m. on October 2nd, 1963. Elena Insurgente. End footnote. Elena was questioned regarding the identity of other persons attending the party at the Ruben Duran home who might have been in a position to observe the three Americans. Elena stated that in the course of the party, her daughter met a young man named Alejandro at the party and danced with him. He was apparently quite smitten with the daughter and tried to call her on several occasions after the party. The daughter did not take the calls, and as a result, Alejandro wrote several letters to the daughter. Miss Garro exhibited two of the letters, as well as a business card which identified the young man as Ario Alejandro Labanini Stenias. The letter which Miss Garro said was the first written by the young man to her daughter bore the date September 1st, 1963, and the Mexico City Post Office postmark dated September 2nd, 1963. When this was pointed out to Miss Garro, she commented that the communists probably had facilities for falsifying postmarks. To investigate Ms. Garro's story further, representatives from the legal attaché's office interviewed Ario Alejandro Lavanini Stenius on November 27, 1964. Lavanini recalled that there were approximately 30 people at Ruben Duran's party, few of whom he knew. He recalled having met a Mexican girl who had recently returned from living in France. He was unable to fix the date of the party, but felt it was probably early in September because of a heavy rain which occurred as they were leaving the party about 2 a.m. Lavanini said that no Americans were present at this party. He was familiar with the physical description of Lee Harvey Oswald because of publicity following the assassination of President Kennedy, but otherwise had no knowledge of him and had never seen him except for news photographs following the assassination. Lavanini was the only person interviewed by the legal attaché representatives who attended parties at the Duran house in the September-October timeframe. There is no indication in the FBI document that this information was given to the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station. 5. Charles Thomas's first meeting with Elena Garro, where Lee Harvey Oswald is discussed. On December 10, 1965, Charles Thomas, a political officer at the American Embassy, wrote a memorandum about a conversation with Elena Garro de Paz. The meeting with Elena had been about other matters, but she mentioned knowing Oswald. Thomas noted that she was reluctant to talk, but did. Elena's story reported here is the same as that given in the Lie-Cookie memo dated October 5, 1964, but with more details. She said that General Jose Jesus Clark Flores, a friend of Ruben Duran's, Sylvia Duran, Eusebio Azcue, Emilio Carballido, a pro-communist writer friend of the Durans, and a Latin American Negro man with red hair, unidentified, were at the party. A marginal comment by this entry in WX7241 says, "How did Elena know about a red-haired Negro?" Elena also told Thomas that she had later learned that Sylvia Duran had been Oswald's mistress while he was there. A note by this entry in WX7241 says, "How did Elena Garro know about Sylvia being the mistress of Oswald?" This is 1965. The Mexico City station did not hear about the Oswald Duran affair until July 1967, when a CIA asset, Leering 3, reported it. Elena told Thomas that she and her daughter had gone to the Cuban embassy on November 23, 1963, and shouted "Assassins" and other insults at the embassy employees. According to Elena, that same day, a friend, Manuel Carvillo, whom the Garros thought to be in the Gobernacion, took her and her daughter to a small hotel in the center of Mexico City. Calvillo kept Elena Garro and her daughter there for 8 days under the pretext that they were in danger of being harmed physically by communists. Elena claimed she told Calvillo her story and that she wanted to tell it to the American authorities at the U.S. Embassy, but that Calvillo dissuaded her by telling her that the American embassy was full of communist spies. Elena said that some of the other people who had been at the party were taken to Veracruz, where they were protected by Governor Lopez Arias. She said that Ruben Duran, reportedly protected by General Clark Flores, was very prosperous and was driving a big car. Elena also claimed that Ruben Duran told her months after the assassination that he was not really a communist and that killing Kennedy had been a mistake. Ruben Duran claimed he had no reason to tell Elena that killing Kennedy had been a mistake, since he had no involvement. Charles Thomas circulated a copy of his memorandum concerning Elena's allegations in the American Embassy, including the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station, to aid them in their investigation of the John F. Kennedy assassination. Footnote: the House Select Committee has determined that the Central Intelligence Agency received the copy of the Thomas Memorandum prior to December 25, 1965, his next meeting with Elena Garro. Also, see below. End footnote. The COS wrote a note on the memo. "What an imagination she has. Should we send to headquarters?" The officer replied on the memo, "Suggest sending. There have been stories around town about all this, and Thomas is not the only person she has talked to. If memory serves me, Didn't Lie Cookie refer to Oswald and the local leftists and Cubans in one of her squibs? The Mexico City station cabled the information in Thomas's December 10, 1965 memorandum of conversation to CIA headquarters. The cable reported that Elena's story would be checked with Lichant 1 against the production from the Cuban surveillance operation and other sources. Winston Scott wrote, next to the routing indications on the cable, "Please ask Charles Thomas if he'll follow up. Get questions from Ann E. Please let's discuss. Thanks." After the December 10th memorandum of conversation, Winston Scott and Nathan Ferris called Charles Thomas for a meeting. They asked him to get a more detailed account of Miss Gattaro's story. At this meeting, Winston Scott made it clear that the FBI had full responsibility for any further investigation in the Oswald case. 6. Charles Thomas's meeting with Elena Gattaro on December 25, 1965. Thomas met with Elena again on December 25, 1965. On that date, he wrote a memorandum of conversation which provided a much more detailed restatement of Miss Gattaro's alleged encounter with Lee Harvey Oswald. Elena admitted that she had spoken to 2 men at the embassy, presumably from the legal attaché's office. Elena said that she did not tell them the complete story because the embassy officers did not give much credence to anything she and Elenita said. She stated that the party had been at Ruben Duran's home. She was unclear about the date of the party. She thought it had been a few days before the Soviet astronaut Gagarin visited Mexico. She thought that this would put the party around September 2nd or 3rd, 1963. She believed that the party was on a Monday or Tuesday because it was an odd night for a party. Elena could not check her calendar to refresh her memory at the time of this interview because the calendar was in a desk that had been stored away. During the conversation, Elena described Oswald and his companions. The man whom she thought was Oswald wore a black sweater. She said he was quiet and stared a lot at the floor. One of his companions was very tall and slender and had long blonde hair and a rather long protruding chin. The other companion was also tall, with short, light brown hair and no distinguishing characteristics. The 3 Americans did not dance or mix with the other guests. Elena saw the same 3 men on the street the next day. Elena was certain that Eusebio Azcue, Horatio Duran, Sylvia Duran, Lydia Duran, Deba Guerrero, General Clark Flores and his mistress, a doctor from Dalinde Hospital, a young American couple who were honeymooning in Mexico, and several other people were at the party. She said that Ricardo Guerra, who she claimed converted Horatio Duran to communism, and his wife, Rosario Castellanos, were supposed to be at the party, but did not attend. Elena alleged that the red-haired man and Emilio Carballido were not at the party that Oswald attended, but at another party where Carballido and Azcue got into a heated argument about President Kennedy. Quote, "They came to the conclusion that the only solution was to kill him." Unquote. Elena was not clear on whether this party was before or after the party where she met Oswald. Eusebio Azcue stated that this conversation never occurred. Elena reiterated that the incident at the Cuban embassy, where she and her daughter shouted "assassins," etc. at the embassy employees, occurred on November 23rd at or about 3 p.m. Elena and Elenita were driven to the Cuban embassy by Elena's brother, who was embarrassed by their behavior. This occurred before they had seen photographs of Oswald. Miss Gattaro claimed that later in the day she and Elenita were visited by Manuel Calvillo, who told them that they were in serious danger from the communists and that he would take them to a small hotel where they would be safe for a few days. Elena said she trusted and believed Calvillo because he was a known undercover agent for the Mexico government. He was also a friend of Noé Palomares and of President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz. Calvillo also told Elena and her daughter that Sylvia Duran had been arrested. Duran's arrest was not public information at that time. Elena could not remember the name of the hotel, so that same day she took Thomas to the section of Mexico City where she thought it was. They found the Hotel Vermont. Elena said that she assumed that Calvillo had registered them as relatives or friends from San Luis Potosi. They stayed at the hotel until the following Friday, November 30th, 1963, hardly leaving their rooms. Elena claimed that while she and Elenita were at the hotel, they saw the photos of Oswald and realized that he had been the man at Ruben Duran's party. When Calvillo visited them at the hotel, Elena told him that she wanted to report her story, which she related to Calvillo, to the American Embassy. Calvillo, however, dissuaded her by saying that the American Embassy was full of communists. Elena stated that when she returned home, guards were posted outside her house. Elena alleged that after she returned home, she saw her sister, Deba Guerrero, who had independently come to the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald had been at Ruben Duran's party. Deba was terrified because approximately 2 months after the assassination, 2 communists personally warned her never to reveal that she had been to a party with Oswald. Deba, consequently, would not accompany Elena to the American Embassy to tell her story on November 24, 1964. Elena stated that it was common knowledge that Sylvia had been Oswald's mistress. When asked who could verify the allegation, she could only remember one person who had told her this. Elena claimed that person was Victor Rico Galan, a pro-Castro journalist. See Section 6A 2A above. Subsequent to December 25, 1965, Elena found her calendar and reconstructed the date of the party as late September and not early September. When Thomas went to Ferris's office and informed him, Ferris replied that Elena had given the late September date when she had originally reported her story at the American Embassy. However, Mr. Ferris explained to Thomas that someone who had been at the twist party had stated that there were no Americans there. Mr. Ferris did not tell Mr. Thomas that Ario Alejandro Lavanini Stenius had provided this information in 1964. Mr. Ferris suggested that it was not necessary for Thomas to pursue Elena's allegations since he considered the Oswald case closed and had heard all the rumors before. Thomas forwarded, the same day, a copy of his memorandum to the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station to aid in its investigation of the John F. Kennedy assassination. On the first page of the memorandum of conversation, Winston Scott wrote, "Shouldn't we send to headquarters?" Someone responded, "Of course." The Mexico City station sent a cable to headquarters on December 12, 1965, reporting that it was following up and would cable the results. 7. December 27, 1965, Legal Attaché Memo to the United States Ambassador, re Elena Garro. On December 27, 1965, Nathan Ferris wrote a memo to the ambassador reporting that Elena and her daughter were interviewed on 17th and 24th of November 1964 by the legal attaché's office in Mexico City. The memo recorded that Elena and her daughter had furnished information similar to the information reported in Thomas's December 10th, 1965 memo. The memo further stated, quote, "Inquiries conducted at that time, November 1964, however, failed to substantiate the allegations made by Mrs. Garro de Paz and her daughter. In view of the fact that Mrs. Garro de Paz's allegations have been previously checked out without substantiation, no further action is being taken concerning her recent repetition of those allegations." End quote. The legal attaché forwarded a copy of the memorandum to the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station prior to December 29, 1965. Footnote: Winston Scott superimposed a note to Ann Goodpasture on this memo which read, quote, "Can we send in a report to headquarters dismissing our cable?" Goodpasture responded, "Done." End quote. The cable Winston Scott wanted dismissed was MEXI 5621, which reported that station was following up and cabling results. The new cable was written and sent on December 29, 1965. See text. End footnote. A cable written by Ann Goodpasture on December 29, 1965, reporting the Legat interview with Elena and the Legat office's failure to substantiate Elena's story, was sent to headquarters. The cable promised to keep headquarters advised if any further information was to develop. Lie Cookie's October 5, 1964 memo is attached to the December 29, 1965 cable. WX7241 explained this in a marginal comment. This document by Lie Cookie was not in Oswald's file, but was copied from a project file and attached to MEXI 5471, 29th of December, 65. A note stapled to this cable by Alan White stated, "I don't know what FBI did in November 1964, but the Garros have been talking about this for a long time, and she is said to be extremely bright." Ann Goodpasture wrote that the FBI had found Elena's allegations unsubstantiated, but that "we will try to confirm or refute Ms. Garro de Paz's information and follow up." Wynne Scott wrote, "She is also nuts." 8. CIA investigation of Elena's allegation that she created a disturbance at the Cuban embassy on November 23, 1963. On February 3, 1966, Ann Goodpasture forwarded Thomas's December 25, 1965 memo to the Cuban section at the Mexico City station, with an attached note asking the section to check whether Elena was seen creating such a disturbance as they claimed in front of the Cuban embassy. One Cuban section officer responded, "No bells ring with me." Another one wrote, "Me neither." The third officer wrote, "No pictures either." There is no indication, after reviewing CIA files, that the penetration agents in the Cuban embassy were queried about Elena's allegations. That there are no pictures is reasonable since Elena claimed that the event happened 1. On a Saturday at 3 p.m. when the Cuban embassy was not normally photographically surveilled, and 2. The disturbance occurred inside the Cuban compound. HSCA examination of the CIA Cuban embassy photographic surveillance showed no surveillance on November 23, 1963. The committee found that Central Intelligence Agency made no other effort to corroborate Ms. Garro's allegations. 9. Legal Attaché, February 23, 1966 memo to the United States Ambassador regarding Elena Garro's allegations. On February 23, 1966, the legal attaché wrote a memo to the ambassador reporting that extensive investigation failed to disclose that Oswald had traveled to Mexico prior to September 26, 1963, and that no information had developed that would show that he had not been in New Orleans in the early part of that month. The memo reiterated that no further action was being taken by the FBI because Elena's allegations had not been substantiated by it. The legal attaché forwarded a copy of this memo to the Central Intelligence Agency's Mexico City station. A marginal comment made by Raymond Roca next to this entry in WX7241 says, "How can it be ascertained that Oswald did not travel to Mexico prior to early September 1963? There must be some basis for Elena's reporting." 10. Legal attaché memo to Winston Scott re Elena's allegation that she had stayed at the Hotel Vermont from the day after the assassination until November 30, 1963. On October 13, 1966, the legal attaché wrote a memo to Wynne Scott reporting that a reliable confidential informant had reported that the records of the Hotel Vermont disclosed that one Elena Paz, housewife from San Luis Potosi, had registered at the Hotel Vermont on November 23, 1963. She left on November 30, 1963. The memo said, "The above individual may or may not be identical with Elena Garro de Paz." The House Select Committee on Assassinations has been unable to determine why the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigations waited until 1966 to investigate this aspect of Elena's story. Charles Thomas's December 25, 1965 memo stating she and her daughter did not personally register at the hotel, she thinks Calvillo registered them as relatives or friends of his from San Luis Potosi, corroborates Elena Garro's presence at the Hotel Vermont. The entry for the October 13th, 1966 Legat memo in WX 7241 bore the notation, "This is what Elena claimed, and no one would believe her." 11. Charles Thomas's September 30th, 1969 letter to State Department and legal attaché's response. No further report on Elena's story was generated until 1969, when Charles Thomas was selected out of the United States Foreign Service. At that time, he wrote a memorandum to the Secretary of State, which included a cover letter stating, "Since I was the embassy officer in Mexico who acquired this intelligence information, I feel a responsibility for seeing it through to its final evaluation." Charles Thomas's memorandum stated that he got no reaction from Nathan Ferris and Winston Scott regarding his memorandum of December 25, 1965. In addition, Thomas wrote that the only person to speak to him about the December 25, 1965 memorandum, Clarence Boonstra, told him that Oswald had not been in Mexico on the date given for the party. Thomas noted that even when he reiterated that Elena had not changed her story, but rather that she had now given a more detailed account, Boonstra stated that the date was wrong and dismissed the entire affair. One of the Mexico City Legat officers, Nathan Ferris, in reply to Thomas's letter and memorandum, asserted that Thomas's office had been advised by memoranda dated December 27, 1965 and February 23, 1966, that since Elena Garro's allegations had previously been investigated without substantiation, no further action was being taken concerning her recent repetition of those allegations. In its report, the Legat's office concluded that either the Counselor for Political Affairs did not route the memoranda to Charles Thomas, or that Thomas did not recall receiving them. Thomas wrote that when he went to Nathan Ferris's office to inform him that Elena had found her calendar and had reconstructed the date of the party as late September, Ferris replied that Elena had given the late September date when she had originally reported her story at the American Embassy. Thomas noted that Ferris explained that someone who had been at the party had stated that there had not been any Americans in attendance. Thomas wrote that he had assumed that Elena could have clearly been mistaken about the identity of the Americans she saw there, but never doubted that she had seen some Americans. Thomas wrote that Ferris had suggested that it was not necessary for Thomas to pursue the matter since he considered the Oswald case closed and had heard all the rumors before. The legal attaché's reply to Thomas's memo stated that Mr. Ferris had not told Thomas that someone who was at the party had stated that there had not been any Americans present. The legal attaché's memo asserted that Thomas had been told that it would not be necessary for him to pursue the matter any further since Elena's story had been investigated previously without being substantiated. In addition, the memo stated that Thomas had been told that Elena's story was considered a closed issue, not that the Oswald case was closed. 12. House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation of Elena Garros's allegations. The House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated Elena Garros's story both through file reviews and personal interviews. The committee requested and reviewed the CIA's, FBI's, and State Department's files on Elena Garro de Paz, Elenita Garro de Paz, Manuel Calvillo, Noe W. Palomares, June Cobb Sharp, Victor Rico Galan, Eunice Odio, Sylvia Duran, Lydia Duran, Ruben Duran, Betty Serratos, Horatio Duran, Eusebio Azcu, and Emilio Carballido. Only the Elena Garro de Paz file contained information on her allegations. Though all the names listed above played a role in Elena Garro de Paz's story, not one of their files included a reference to Elena Garro de Paz. Furthermore, the House Select Committee on Assassinations requested and reviewed the Central Intelligence Agency's Lie Cookie 1, Lie Chant 1, Leering 3, and Tichborne files. Once again, not one of the files included a mention of Elena Garros's allegations. The House Select Committee on Assassinations learned that Lie Cookie 1, who first reported to the CIA Elena's allegation, was June Cobb Sharp. Redacted, Manuel Calvillo, who had hidden Elena Garro and her daughter in a hotel the day following the assassination. He also told Elena that Sylvia Duran had been arrested before this fact had become public knowledge. Since a file review was inconclusive, the committee arranged interviews in Mexico with Ruben Duran, Horacio Duran, Elena and Elenita Garro, Sylvia Duran, Lynn Duran, Emilio Carballido, and Betty Serratos. The Mexican government informed the House Select Committee on Assassinations that Elena and Elenita Garro disappeared in 1968 during the student uprisings and have never returned to Mexico. The officials stated that Elena and her daughter might be in Spain. The Mexican government reported that Emilio Carballido could not be found. The others were interviewed between June 1st and June 6, 1978. Betty Serratos, Lydia Duran, Ruben Duran, and Horacio Duran all stated that Elena was not the dancing type and therefore did not attend any of the twist parties at the Duran homes. When Sylvia Duran was asked if Elena or Elenita Garro ever attended twist parties at the Duran homes, she recalled Elena attending one twist party at Ruben's home in 1963 after the Garros returned to Mexico from France. All the Durans denied that Lee Harvey Oswald had attended any party at any one of their homes. The committee next asked the Central Intelligence Agency to arrange interviews with redacted Cookie 1, June Cobb, who may have had information related to Lee Harvey Oswald's trip to Mexico City. The Central Intelligence Agency declined to aid the committee in this aspect of the investigation. The committee returned to Mexico City on August 7, 1978, and attempted to locate June Cobb Sharp and Manuel Calvillo on its own. The Mexican government told the committee that June Cobb Sharp received a tourist permit, number 72781, on June 27, 1947, when she entered Mexico through Nuevo Laredo. She asked, but was denied, permission to represent the magazine Modern Mexico. On June 21, 1948, she received a courtesy permit, number 25556. Furthermore, the Mexican government explained that she disappeared in 1954 and never returned to Mexico. The committee believes that this information is incorrect. According to Ms. Cobb's CIA file, she worked for the agency as an asset in Mexico from 1961 through 1966. Elena also stated that Ms. Cobb resided at her home in 1964. The Mexican government told the committee that Manuel Calvillo did not live at Cuauhtémoc 877-5 as the committee had informed it. The Mexican government's agent in charge had spoken to the superintendent at the apartments at which Manuel Calvillo was believed to reside and was informed by the superintendent, who had worked at the apartments for 25 years, said that no Manuel Calvillo had ever resided there. When committee staffers gave the Mexican government Calvillo's pen name, the Mexicans gave the same answers. The committee believes that there is a possibility that Mr. Calvillo lived at this address since it acquired the address from a recent CIA document. The committee believes that there is a possibility that a U.S. government agency requested the Mexican government to refrain from aiding the committee with this aspect of its work. See Procedural Write-Up, Trip 2, Mexico City, and Section 7C below. The committee made every attempt possible to locate Elena. On July 7, 1978, the committee telephoned her publisher, Mortiz, in Mexico City and inquired about Elena's whereabouts. The publisher stated that Ms. Garro was living in the Hotel SACE in Madrid, Spain. The committee telephoned the Hotel SACE in Spain and spoke to the manager, who told him that Ms. Garro had moved. On July 14, 1978, the committee called her publisher again and was told to contact the Mexican embassy in Madrid, Spain. The publisher stated that all Elena's payments were sent there because she did not even trust her publisher with her address. The committee called the Mexican embassy in Madrid, Spain, and spoke to Adolfo Padilla, a Mexican employee of the embassy who stated that when Elena had visited the embassy a couple of weeks before to pick up a check, she seemed financially destitute. He stated that when he asked Elena her new address, she declined to give one, stating that she would return every few weeks to pick up checks and mail. The committee gave Padilla a telephone number and a message asking Elena to telephone the committee collect. On September 5, 1978, Elena Garro called the committee. When it was explained that the committee wished to talk to her in person and would pay both her daughters and her travel from Spain to the United States, Ms. Garro asked why she should believe the committee was what it claimed to be. The committee asked Ms. Garro to call back collect in the next few days when it could explain to her when and where she could receive a committee letter delineating why the committee wished to interview her. The committee wrote the letter and made arrangements with the State Department for a letter to be hand-delivered to Elena at the American Embassy in Spain. On September 7, 1978, Elena Garro called the committee and asked when the letter would arrive. The committee explained that she could pick up the letter on Monday, September 11, 1978, from George Phelan, the counselor for consular affairs at the American Embassy. Ms. Garro stated that she would get the letter on September 11, 1978, and follow our suggestions. Ms. Garro never went to the American Embassy in Spain to pick up the committee's letter. The committee, hoping she would pick up the letter before her flight date, proceeded to purchase air tickets for both Elena and her daughter. Elena did not pick up the tickets at the airport. The committee has not been able to regain contact with Miss De Paz again. The committee also investigated whether Charles Thomas's selection out was related to the Oswald case. After interviewing his widow, Miss Cynthia Thomas, the committee has concluded that his dismissal was unrelated. In sum, the House Select Committee on Assassinations has not been able to confirm the evidence that would indicate that Lee Harvey Oswald, on one night while he was in Mexico, attended a twist party at the home of Ruben Duran Navarro, the brother-in-law of Sylvia Duran. In addition, the House Select Committee on Assassinations has been unable to confirm the allegation that Lee Harvey Oswald traveled while in Mexico City with two beatnik-looking boys. A large part of the committee's attempts to investigate these issues has met with frustration. D. Oscar Contreras Lartigue. On March 16, 1967, B.J. Royal, the American consul in Tampico, reported to the American Embassy that he had spoken to a reporter who allegedly had met Lee Harvey Oswald at the National Autonomous University of Mexico City in 1963. The reporter, stressing that he had only a fleeting contact with Oswald, had claimed to have known only about Lee Harvey Oswald's desire to travel to Cuba and the embassy's unwillingness to grant him a visa. When B.J. Royal asked the reporter for permission to cable the story to the American Embassy, the reporter declined, stating that he feared losing his job. Subsequent to the assassination, the reporter had told his editor about his contact with Lee Harvey Oswald, who had advised him not to report it. The reporter granted B.J. Royal permission to cable the story to the American Embassy when Royal promised that it would be handled with the strictest confidence. Royal wrote that he thought the reporter was genuinely concerned about his job. A letter from B.J. Royal to the State Department, dated May 11, 1967, provided additional details of the reporter's story. The reporter alleged that he and some fellow students had met Lee Harvey Oswald as they exited the Cine Club at the Escuela de Filosofia, School of Philosophy, at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Oswald told the group that he had gone to the National Autonomous University of Mexico looking for pro-Castro students who might help him persuade the Cuban embassy to grant him a visa. Oswald claimed that he was from California and was a member of a pro-Castro group in New Orleans. Oswald remained with the students the rest of that day and evening, as well as the following day. The reporter described Oswald as a strange and introverted individual who spoke very little Spanish. The State Department forwarded a copy of Royal's letter to the Central Intelligence Agency. On June 14, 1967, CIA headquarters sent the Mexico City station a copy of Royals' letter to Boyles. CIA headquarters considered Royals' report the first piece of substantive info about Oswald's sojourn in Mexico since the assassination. Consequently, headquarters cabled that though it understood the source's reluctance to become involved, the fact remains that this info cannot continue to be withheld or concealed. Headquarters instructed the Mexico City station to elicit the identity of the source from Royal. In addition, headquarters asked the Mexico City station to bear in mind, while interviewing Royal's source, that Lee Harvey Oswald was a homosexual. The final sentence of the dispatch: "It is our hope that the facts obtained through these interviews will help to confirm that several of Garrison's allegations about involvement of anti-Castro Cubans, the CIA, etc., are false," explained the Central Intelligence Agency's motives for pursuing the story. On June 29, 1967, the Mexico City station cabled headquarters that a station officer had gone to Tampico where he had interviewed Royal's source, Oscar Contreras. The cable reported that Contreras was a reporter for El Sol. Redacted, in Tampico, was circa 30 years old, married with 3 children, studied law at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, from 1960 to 1964, belonged to a pro-Castro group at UNAM, was persecuted by the Mexican police for this affiliation, and moved to Tampico to escape the persecution. Contreras told the Mexico City station official that he and 4 other individuals had met Oswald as they exited a round-table discussion held at the School of Philosophy at UNAM. Footnote: when Contreras was asked to identify the other 4 individuals who had met Lee Harvey Oswald, he refused to reveal their names because he feared that informing on them might endanger his family. End footnote. Contreras stated that Oswald had made inquiries on the UNAM campus about pro-Cuban groups and had been directed to his group. Contreras reported that though the group initially mistrusted Oswald, fearing he was a CIA provocation, they allowed Oswald to remain with them that day and night and part of the following day. Contreras noted that Oswald never mentioned assassination, but kept emphasizing that he had to get to Cuba. In addition, Oswald had exhibited no homosexual tendencies while he was with the group. On July 4, 1967, headquarters cabled the Mexico City station that Contreras' story should be explored to the fullest, even though he might have fabricated it. Headquarters suggested that the FBI handle the story. The following day, July 5, 1967, the Mexico City station cabled that it preferred turning Contreras' case over to the Mexican authorities and to the FBI. The same day, the chief of station informed the Legat of Contreras' story, but asked him not to take any action without first consulting the Mexico City station. On July 10, 1967, Jeremy K. Benedum, JKB, wrote a memo delineating the results of a Mexican government review of Oscar Contreras' file. According to a memo, a lone Oscar Contreras appeared in the UNAM Law School records. Oscar Contreras Lartigue, born February 14, 1939, in Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. The memo also reported that a newspaper article appearing in Excelsior listed an Oscar Contreras as a signer of a protest for the Bloque Estudiantil Revolucionario, which had been formed mid-1961. The memo speculated that Contreras probably signed the protest as a frontman to protect the real leaders of the group. The Mexico City station cabled the information to headquarters the following day, June 11, 1969. The committee has determined that the Central Intelligence Agency's main interest in Oscar Contreras was to confirm that several of Garrison's allegations about involvement of anti-Castro Cubans, the CIA, etc., are false. After the CIA Mexico City station officials' interview with Contreras revealed nothing that could be useful to the agency, it decided to allow the FBI to follow the story through. Nonetheless, the agency's Mexico City station interviewed the key witness, reviewed pertinent files and records about the witness in the Mexico government's possession, and reported all the information to headquarters expeditiously.